Hi there, welcome to this video. It's less a tutorial and more a description of my process of how I got a piece of footage that was shot as part of a Matchmove masterclass, and how we got this piece of footage that we shot with rolling shutter issues and very strong wind issues on the day, how we got that down to a solve error of 0.1. So I'm just going to discuss through the process of how I approached it and take it from there. So hopefully you find this kind of useful. So we're going to go new project. I'm going to set it up as motion tracking, and I'm going to load my footage. So we're going to navigate to the particular file in question, which I believe is at the capture 3, just here. So capture 3. I'm going to select the first clip, press open clip, and then I'm going to prefetch the frames into the RAM. We can see the purple bar increasing here. Whilst that's going on, I'm going to come to my footage information. It's 3840 by 2160. So let's go 3840 by 2160. And it was shot at 25 frames a second. And the end frame of this footage is 130, tells me in the information here. So let's type 130 as the end frame here. And if we play back, we can see our footage. To help us solve, we're also going to put in a few bits of information about the camera and the lens. So let's open up the lens and the camera. It was shot with a 16mm lens. And the sensor size of this camera, well, you can do a bit of research. Let's go on to Chrome. Let's type in A6-3000 sensor size. And we can see it's 23.5. So let's go back to Blender. Let's go to 23.5. And let's make sure this says 16mm again. So there we go. We've got all the information we need to try and get a solve from this. Now my instinct always is to go to detect features. So let's press detect features and see what it gives us. And there's already some things that we should be concerned about if it was going to use these. So straight away I'm going to delete anything that's kind of around this top area, but we can just track forward if we want. And if we track back, we can do a combination now of manually filtering what we think is going to be appropriate or not, and then using some refining tools inside here. So I'm going to just A to deselect all. I'm just going to press B to box select, and I'm just going to select all of the ones that sit back here. And I'm just going to press delete track. And that's scrubbed through, and that's left us with a number of tracks just here. And we can see there's some quite short-lived tracks in here. So if I was to try and solve this at this point, let's see what it gives us. So I've pressed A to select all, and it's been using keyframe as its methodology. So let's have a look. Let's try solve camera motion, and it's given us 1.5, which isn't all that bad, but I'm sure we can do better. So let's go back here. Let's keep these all selected, like so. Let's change our tracking methodology. So I'm going to delete all these markers, and I'm going to set this to blurry footage. I'm going to set it to, and it defaults to previous frame and pre-pass. And then at this point, we can ask it then to detect features. Now we can track forward using this new methodology. And it tracks forwards, and we can see some ones that are zigzagging around and getting somewhat confused. Okay, so let's scrub this back. Again, I'm going to delete a lot of these ones along the top, but again, I need to deselect first with A, B to box select. And I'm just going to take this big swathe of features out of here. Okay, so let's select all. And let's come to solve. Let's solve camera motion. It gives us 6. Doesn't seem much better, but it might be picking up on some certain obvious things here. Now, to help us assess this, we're going to look at this graph at the top as well. And the solve line is our blue line. And you can see it starts not very good. Then it kind of has a couple of wobbles here. And what I'm looking for straight away, manually look, I'm looking for these particular tracks that stick out from everything else. So there's lots of tracks that are bunched together, which is good. But I'm looking for these ones that create spikes on their own. So I'm going to select each one of these in this graph, and that'll select its tracking marker down here. I'm just going to press delete. I'm going to come through and I'm going to delete all of these ones that stand out from the crowd. So I'm trying to isolate the ones that are obviously creating quite a bit of error. So I can manually carry on doing this, going through and deleting curves that stand out, obviously, that seem to be disrupting our solve quality somewhat. So we're going through pretty brutally, and we're deleting out any of these anomalies that make our shape look less refined. So there's a big one up here, look, for example. Yeah. So let's select these all again. Solve camera motion. And we've already got it down to 1.2 from 6. That's not bad. And you'll notice that it's used the keyframes from 1 to 30 to solve the motion. So let's say, where's most of the movement? I would say it's kind of 30 to 70 maybe. So let's try that. Let's try use 30 to 70. And let's see what we get. 1.2511 still. All right, so the movement is pretty. Let's try refining the focal length a bit. 1.1. So we're getting closer. So we're already getting this lower. So let's try a few other things. Let's try and clean up. So let's use this clean up function. And it basically says affect track switch tracks no less than the specified amount of frames. So this is saying we want to get rid of short frames. I'm going to define an error. I want things that are below. I want to get everything deleted that's below 1. So let's go, or 0.8. Let's get rid of anything. So that's clean tracks. So let's deselect that and go clean tracks. So it's selected all the ones that it thinks are adding error. So let's delete those. Let's come back and let's see what we've got now. 0.4. So let's see if we can go even lower. Let's go 0.5 error. Clean tracks. Delete. Let's select these. Let's solve again. 0.3. So again, much closer. So let's see if we can be really brave. Let's see if we can get anything below 0.3. Let's clean tracks. Well, actually, let's deselect first. So let's deselect, clean tracks. We might lose a few too many tracks now. Might have gone too far. 0.1. Not bad at all, but we've lost quite a bit of geometry on the floor, but maybe we can work with this. So got this right down from 6th, using the graph up here, using our cleanup tracks, and using our general observation to get it to a point where we've got a solve error of almost a perfectly flat blue line with very little kind of erratic movement in it. So something from 6 right down to 0.1. And that's how we can clean up our solve and our track until we get something we like. So we're going to just save at that point. And let's just see how we can then test this geometry out. So let's change our Blender render to Cycles renderer. I'm using my GPU because I've got a dedicated GPU. You could keep it as CPU as your compute device. And I'm going to change my sampling. Let's keep it at the standard. Light paths, I'm going to simplify those down to 2 because nothing really above 2 makes that huge amount of difference. Let's put these down. Let's turn off caustics. Let's filter our glossy just one increment. Let's come to performance, and because we're using the GPU, not the CPU, we get the tile sizes bigger. If we're using the CPU, we take these down to 16. And let's just save at that point. And now what we can do is we can add some geometry into this and reconstruct the scene. So now we've set it to cycles renderer. That's important that we do that before we build the scene. So let's set background and set up tracking scene. If we come over to our 3D perspective at the top, press 0 on our number pad to look through our 3D view, and we can bring this down a bit because we're not too bothered about the graph anymore. And what I'm going to do is pick some things that I think best represent the floor. So I'm going to pick this feature, and this feature here. So I was keeping my finger on shift as I clicked all three. I'm going to set that as the floor. There we go. And then I need to set my y-axis. So I've really got nothing on the y, so I could eyeball this in, but we can make one of these the origin. So I'm just going to bring up the info for that. So let's see all the info for our footage. Info, so that's 0.6, 0.175, so 0.166. I'm going to make that my origin. So I've set that as my origin. So I've set the floor, that's the origin of my floor. I'm going to set something that's in the x-axis. That might be easiest from the origin. So there we go. We'll set x, so that orientates the scene. And then we just need to set the scale. So I'm going to select these two and say that maybe that's, say, 2, set scale. And that's looking quite nice. And then what we can simply do is come and select the plane, rotate on the Z, and just rotate that, and you can see it brings it into nice perspective. Looking good. And then we can bring our cube up and just sit that, just so it sits on the floor there. And let's press render. We'll see a quick render. Going through all the compositing nodes that Blender automatically set up. There we go, that's a good start. I might just rotate it on the Z a little so it seems a bit more in line with the perspective of the floor. That's just attention to detail, I think. I'm just going to add some world lighting. So I'm going to use the world, use nodes, and I'm just going to pick from the color that we have here. Maybe make that 0.4. And let's look through our rendered view so we can see what we're doing as we update. And then I'm also going to add an area lamp. Well, there should already be a lamp in here. So let's bring this up. Let's make this an area light. And get the angle about right. It's not far off now, look. I'm kind of saying the light's coming in from behind and the side. So let's bring that up. So our camera's here. Let's rotate it on the Z. And let's maybe make it maybe 10 by 10, say. Use the nodes and let's make the color that lighting of our world again. And let's just see what this looks like through the camera. Press 0. There we go. And let's just render an image. Also, if we want to add any more geometry into this composite, what we can do is you can see the two render layers that Blender automatically set up when we press set up tracking scene. We need to make sure that this first layer is the only one selected when we add any new geometry. So if we go add mesh monkey, say for example, go to solid view, we can bring that up and then we can rotate this on the X, say, and bring it down so it's sitting on top of on top of the box there. We might leave it quite faceted. It's kind of an interesting look. I might just put some smoothing on, see what that does. No, that doesn't. All right, let's keep it quite faceted. And then if we want to add textures to any of these, we can simply come to materials, use nodes, and instead of a color, we might want to pick a checkerboard texture. And let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's quite cool. Let's create the same one. We can use the same material here. And there we go. And then if we wanted to just simply Shift D to duplicate, X, and then we can move something there. And we could scale that down. And if we want to see our floor again, let's just shift and click on this layer to bring up the other layer. So they're both on. And then we can bring this down and sit it on the floor. So for now, if we go render image, we have our materials, we have our shadows being cast onto one another and onto the floor, which are then subsequently rendered into the scene. And if we just want to mimic the bounce light from this floor onto our objects, let's select our floor plane. Let's give it a material and let's get its color from the environment like so. Let's put up its roughness a little bit. And then let's just render that just to see a negligible effect. But sometimes if you've got quite a dominant color floor, it can make a hell of an impact and mimics that bounced light that we're getting. Now that's interesting. For some reason it isn't quite doing what it should do. So let's just come back. It could be that because this solid exists in both, sometimes just going into the compositing nodes can force it to do what we want it to do. So let's go to compositing. And we can see the compositing nodes that it automatically set up. We might find that actually, where it's multiplying the shadows, it's possibly doing those too harshly. So let's try rendering again. Or it might be that just the lighting that we've put into the scene is just too low to mimic how light this would be. And I think that is the case. I think there's just too little light in there. Yep. So with this in mind, let's select our light in our 3D view. Let's come in here, and yes, this is very low, this value. So let's try 3000 and let's see what we get. Yeah, there we go. So for the multiplier to work, it needs to be lit. And we're getting a more accurate representation of the reflected light off the back of this. So let's go maybe 6000, because we've got a large area light. There we go. We're kind of getting some more pronounced light source now. And these shadows match similar to the shadows we've got from the natural shadows in the environment. So that looks a lot better. There we go. We could spend more time positioning that lantern and just getting it just right. The intensity of light hitting here and here, and then the edges here is more akin to what we're getting here. You'll notice the resolution is a bit soft, and that's because we're doing 50% render over the footage. So if we were to put this up to 100% in our render settings here, we'd get much a sharper render. Okay. So that's our compositing setup. We just need to render out the animation. I've already got let's get my compression down to 0. Let's go to my preview location, ready to render out, like so. I'm just going to delete those old renders out. I'm going to call this preview, press accept. So we're creating a PNG sequence with no compression, 8 bits, because it's just a preview. We've called it preview in this location. We're saying that we're going to render to a new window. We've set up all our other rendering settings for GPU rendering, and I'm just going to simply render to animation. Right, the rendering is finished. Let's have a quick look. Render, play rendered animation. We see our objects are stuck rigidly to the floor. And all in all, a good solve, especially when we consider when we scrub through our footage. Let's change it back to motion tracking. What I'd like to just notice is as we scrub through this footage, the warping and the blurring that's most commonplace with a rolling shutter on an SLR. If we were to record this with a non-CMOS sensor, if we recorded this with a sensor that was geared more towards video, we'd get much less of this skewing and warping that we associate with a CMOS sensor and rolling shutter. So every few frames we're getting this a very acute blur and warping of objects. You could see the image actually just shift and change there at that point. Okay, all subtle stuff, all stuff that normally makes it very difficult to get an accurate solve. But with those methodologies that I just showed you, you can get really good results out of this. So, thank you.